Firstly, thank you, Paula, for having me along. The first edition of Content Audits and Inventories was a bit of a Bible for me, my early days as a content strategist. So it was really cool to get to contribute to second edition. And for everyone joining us, Big Yuma, which is the Ngunnawal word for welcome. The Ngunnawal people being the traditional owners of the land where I am. So I'm in Canberra, capital of Australia. Paula has already given the intro, so I'll just tell you some cool stuff. So when I was growing up, I was actually born in the UK, and I thought that in Australia there were just like kangaroos bouncing around the streets all over the place. And then I moved to Australia to another city when I was 9, and it wasn't that. It was really just beaches and steelworks and gum trees. And then when I was, early 30s, I moved to Canberra, which is the capital, and legit, there were actually kangaroos bounding around the streets of the nation's capital. So we have two main crops, kangaroos and politicians. And if you are in the wrong place at the wrong time in Canberra, you're bound to run into one or the other of those. I worked in government for a while, and was in corporate communications type roles, and just got increasingly interested in thinking more holistically about content. So about 12 years ago, I left my secure but slightly soul-destroying government job and started True North. And initially, I was all about helping the little guy, small businesses, and I still think that's really important. But it became clear to me that the problems that I'm most interested in solving and where I personally feel I can do the most good are ones where there's complexity involved. And so, having left government, I then realized that that was actually where I should focus. Now, I just want to apologize. I'm actually looking at two versions of my presentation. That's going to confuse me and probably you. So I'm just going to quickly stop sharing. And just to make sure I'm sharing the one right thing for you all. Cool. All right, here we go. And again, I'm just going to try and get that full screen thing going. View. And hey, there we are. That's better. Cool. So, as I was saying, I'd been running True North for a couple of years, and then I had a moment of clarity when the NorthStar Framework occurred to me, and I remember super clearly exactly what I was doing when I had this idea, because I was actually in hospital with my daughter. So she was maybe 18 months at the time, and she had bronchiolitis, which is just like it's like an infection of the lower lungs. And it's one of those really scary things. If you're a parent, there are stuff that as an adult you can just shrug off, but it was just a cold, and she got really sick. So I was in hospital with her. And as you can see in the photo, I spent a lot of time with her just sort of asleep on my chest. And I had a big deadline that was looming a couple of days later. And so this felt like an extreme example of what a lot of us deal with in our work. We have all of these priorities pressing in on us, and sometimes those priorities are given to us. We don't always get to choose or indeed make sense of what's most important. The other thing too, though, was that I was removed from my usual work environment. I wasn't just at my desk beavering away. So there was something about being taken away from the day-to-day flow of my work that gave me a bit of time to reflect. And here's what I came up with. So firstly, organizations are drowning in possibilities. Folks are not usually short of ideas or things that they could do. It's a question of often have too many things competing for attention, and the decisions on priorities are often made reactively or based on loosely defined agendas. If in working in content, we know that very often folks will gravitate to the output. We need a thing. Let's do an entirely new website, or let's create this content. But there's often not a sense of why we're doing this. And again, working a lot with content teams in large organizations, the kind of the what resources do we have is often not considered. And so a lot of content teams that I know are often really, really stretched, and they're often in a purely, so speaking about government here, which is our main client base, they're often just in a clearinghouse model where business areas will update something and it's just their job to do it, to get it up on a website. So there's often not a sense of how we're actually going to maintain this presence. Do we already have the resources? And then finally, it felt like there was a bit of a gap between the strategic vision and the execution. And I'll say more about that in a second. So today's going to be definitely sharing the framework that I came up with for making those tactical content decisions. But I also wanted to go a bit meta and talk about different types of models, because my hope here is not that I'm going to sell you the NorthStar Framework or anything. It's up on my website. You can just pick it up and use it. But to kind of reflect on the roles that models play in our practice as content strategists. So firstly, we've got models for understanding. Now, this is, if we're doing a large strategy, the models that we use to make sense of all of the things that we could be talking about, and that we can sort of hooks that we can hang our ideas off. This is one that we use. It's adapted by the Content Strategy Quad by Christina Halverson, which I know has gone through a couple of iterations. So for this one, we've got substance, which is the actual content pieces themselves that people are interacting with. This would have considerations of format, tone, etc. We've got the structure, which is information architecture, how people actually find their way to the content in the first place. So that's the above the line, the stuff that the users interact with. Then below the line, we've got intent, which is the plans, the marketing plans, the brand strategies, the content calendars. And then we've got the systems, which is not just the tech, but bringing a systems thinking lens to it, which is around capabilities, workflows, people's resources. I think the reason we wanted to kind of tweak what was already there and adapt it is that often our clients are not content strategy people, they're digital people or tech. And I remember presenting this to a large government department, and they're like, well, what about our digital strategy? And we're able to say, well, this is where this kind of interfaces with them. But again, this is just one model for understanding. There's others like this one from the Content Strategy Inc., which is more of a canvas for capturing the different considerations. So these things are really useful for upstream and for structuring our thinking. However, my sense was that we also needed something when we were getting into that stage of, okay, great, so what are we actually going to do? Remembering we're getting ideas, priorities from all these different places. So how do we make sense of that, and how might we triage it? And so that's where I got to the NorthStar Framework. And, actually, no, first, sorry. I also wanted to talk about another model for deciding, which is the desirability, feasibility, viability model. So in this one, desirability is a product that people want or need. Feasibility is, can we actually create it? And viability is this going to be profitable? Now, to me, this didn't talk about everything that I wanted to talk about. So just as an example, when we're working in government and peak body, the viability, the profitability doesn't really come into it. But also, often our clients will have business goals even in private sector, they'll have business goals other than just be profitable. You know, it may also be about managing our social license, our license to operate, or managing our regulatory and compliance needs. So there were a few other gaps that I felt with this one. The other thing too is that, and this may be just me as a neurodivergent person, and yeah, I found it hard to remember what feasibility, desirability, and viability were. You know, I can retain infinite amounts of 80s pop trivia in my head, but actually going like, hang on, what are those things? What do they mean? That's something that, to be honest, I need to really work hard to remember every time. Now, I want to be really clear here. I am not out to displace any other models, or even to denigrate them. In sharing my sense of what's missing, it's very much what's missing for me, and to share with you the process that I went through to kind of arrive at the NorthStar Framework. If any of these models that I've covered are useful for you, then please go nuts, keep on using them. This is more just to offer something else into the conversation. And so here it is, NorthStar Framework. And it has 4 components to it. In a way, it's similar to the IDEO one, feasibility, desirability, in that, you know, the idea is that we're trying to find something that meets all 4 criteria. So they are human need, a business need, are we offering unique value, and do we have the resources to do it? And I'll just step through each of those things in turn. So the business need is an outcome that your organization has to achieve. Could be even a strategic plan. It could be an operational thing, like we just want to reduce contact center volume, for example. It could be a communications and marketing objective. We want people to be aware of this thing. We want to shift their behavior in this way. We want to get this new product in people's consideration set. It could also be, as I mentioned, a compliance thing. So it could be something around we need to have a privacy statement up on our website. And how we might find this out: desk research, internal workshops, internal interviews. And I start with business need for a very specific reason, which is, you know, if we're working in human-centered design, we're building things to do good and to create things that work for users and meet their needs. My sense is that the business need frames how we think about everything else that follows, including what user needs are relevant for us. A case study on that one. So we're doing some work with the Cancer Institute of New South Wales. In that case, we're doing a brand and messaging strategy for them. And I looked at their website, and it has a lot of stuff on it around what is cancer. Now, the role of the Cancer Institute of New South Wales is very much working as part of the health system. It's, capturing data, feeding that back to health service providers to inform their practice. It's process improvement across the entire system, modeling best practice, advising on policy. There's a lot of really, really, really good stuff that it does, but that's not really clear from the website. And so the advice that I gave to the client is that, you know, if you are only paying attention to user needs, then potentially you might be serving user needs that are in a way that's kind of displacing the specific value that your organization can offer. And it means that the website potentially isn't actually fulfilling its business objectives. It's not saying to your audience, your stakeholders, this is what we're about, this is how we can help you. In framing that distinction, I want to make it really, really clear that the website should still be useful for people. It's just, what kind of useful? Out of all the different types of useful that we could be, what should we focus on? Can I just check, by the way, is that making sense to people? Again, as a neurodivergent people, I like to just quickly check in and make sure that I'm not totally freaking people out. I'm seeing a yes. Awesome. Okay, cool, cool. All right, so that's a business need. Next up, we go to user need, audience need, customer need. I would call this whatever my immediate stakeholders will connect with. Crucially, this must be real. It must be something that we have some kind of evidence of people actually wanting. And this is probably my criticism of certainly how a lot of communication strategy is done in government. There'd be a lot of like, here's our audience and here's our key message, but there's not really a sense of what do people actually need. It tends to just go straight to what do we want to tell people. How to find this out? All the stuff that you folks would be familiar with. Interviews, contextual observation, analytics, surveys. It's all the stuff that we would already have in our toolkit. Next up. Oh, actually, sorry, one thing I want to mention here, and this is often a bit of a disappointment for some clients, that people don't need our content. So users are almost never sitting there going, oh, I wish someone would give me a blog post, or I wish someone would write a web page for me about this. They need the thing that the content helps them to do. And so actually explicitly calling out what is the user need here means that we can kind of look past the output and connect it back to something human. All right, next up, resourcing. So this is the how. It's, do we have the staff, skills, systems, money to do this thing? And this is, coming back to what I shared earlier around very, very often, decisions will be made to produce content without necessarily considering whether people have the time to do it, and also what the ongoing governance of that looks like. What's the content hygiene? So often, and I know this will be familiar to folks on this call, websites will be launched and it's like, hooray, we've done a thing. And we've invested a lot in the design and the build, and maybe we even put some money behind the content, and then everyone walks away. So part of the resourcing is just, it's not just, can we create it? Is it feasible? Can we do it with newer existing technology? It's, can we actually sustain this into the future? How to find this out, desk research, capability reviews, so on. And then we go to unique value. So it's, what are you uniquely placed to offer? And that uniqueness could come from, a position of authority that your organization or your brand has built up. It could be exclusiveness. So very often if we're working with a government department, they are literally the only place that you can go to get a visa or to pay a parking ticket. They have the monopoly on that stuff. It's innovation, which is something that's new to market. The perspective, this is where brand comes in. What is your unique take on this? And we could all think of, people, thought leaders, or brands that have a very, very distinctive voice. It's recognizably them. And that could be not just their tone, but their take. If we think about our favorite podcasters, one of mine is Malcolm Gladwell, and that's because there is a perspective, there is a way that he thinks that I associate uniquely with him. And then finally, excellence. So just being better than everyone else out there. How to find this out? Comparator analysis, channel strategy. One thing I'd call out here too, though, is we sometimes do projects around intranets. And so there, the unique value is quite interesting because it's like, it's just one system, right? But there, the unique value comes through in how the different internal channels may interact with each other. So, for example, how does the intranet interact with email? Very often, we'll see email being used as a stopgap because of deficiencies in the intranet. And so stuff will be sent out that potentially competes with information that is that is or perhaps should be provided through the intranet instead. All right, cool. So you're kind of seeing, hopefully, that the NorthStar framework, it's more of um, a set of inquiries or a set of lenses. The exact um, inquiry that you bring to each lens is something that you can very, very much customize for your practice and your context. So I'm going to go into case study. So we've just launched with our digital partners a site for a massive Australian law enforcement agency. If you're Aussies, kind of think the main one. And so what we did there is work with them to define the priorities for their content. You know, we had some budget allocated to rewriting their website, but their content hadn't been touched for hundreds of years, like well over a decade. And so out of everything that we could look at, what should we look at? And so we identified the following priorities. Number one, content about child exploitation and what this organization was doing to combat that. Next one, criminal records check. Next one, recruitment. A huge focus for this organization was trying to get more people in working there coming from a broader cross-section of the community, because for them, that's a huge strategic focus. You know, if they want to gain people's trust, then they need to reflect the community back to them. And then finally, about us. Who are we? What do we do? This organization had historically been working in the background, doing amazing stuff, but not really talking about it and not really talking about where they fit in relation to other organizations out there. So that's kind of the priorities we arrived at, but this is sort of under the hood on how we actually structured this. So we can do a matrix for the NorthStar framework where we step through each one. And so child exploitation, for example, why is this important? It's because the organization had identified it as one of their top 5 priorities. People care about it. The AFP had already done a lot of work on this already, so there's existing content, and they had a unique role. Criminal records check. The reason that this was important because this was the single biggest source of traffic to their website. So it was something that was important to this organization, but super high on search demand. And so on with recruitment and about us. So you can see here that we're making decisions with the client in a way that's a little bit more transparent, you know, than just, oh, we reckon this because of this. It's an opportunity where you can actually engage people in the decision making. And this is another example. Actually, sorry, my slides are broken. So ignore, okay. This is a case study. Ignore the heading, please. Apologies. I just added this in about half an hour beforehand. This is a case study from work we did with the ACT government's student attraction section. So their role is to try and get people into Canberra to study at one of the various institutions there. So we've got content about Canberra as a safe city to study. We knew from our research that this is something that particularly international students care about. Had what information is there to support businesses. So that one's relevant to the business section of the website. Information on a skilled migration program. Yes, that's relevant to the work section of the website. Advice on how to find housing is interesting for everyone. You know, students, businesses who may be wanting to attract staff, etc. But then we had a bit of an outlier, which is course finder software. This one was relevant to the study section, and that team had been pitched some, a tool that would plug into their website, and people could go to the ACT government's website, go to the study section, and they'd be able to search for courses, and that would integrate with the databases from the various educational institutions. So you could say, go, right, I am interested in engineering, show me what courses are available. It was going to be $40,000 Australian just out of the gate to get that bit of software. And what we saw is that from the user need perspective, there actually wasn't one, because our research showed us that by the time people were coming to consider Canberra or to consider studying in Canberra, they already knew what courses were on offer there. There's also something that they could get elsewhere, so there wasn't a unique value, and it was expensive, so it wasn't something that they were resourced to do. So that's a situation where we can actually do this as a workshop with a client. So do it in Miro, do it in Butcher's paper, and actually get people to plot the different options. So typically the way I do that is have some kind of ideation brainstorming, come up with ideas, and then we'd plot it. Or you could look at, here's our existing work plan, let's use this framework to kind of sense check that and triage things. And when I was running this workshop with my client, the ACT government, they were actually like, this is really cool. Can you go and get Ollie, one of the other people in the team, and tell me he needs to be in this workshop right now? So that was hugely encouraging for me, because it suggests that they were finding it useful. All right, let's do an example together. This is the real exercise. So we've got 3 examples: information on how to pay a parking fine, news article with a detailed discussion of the council's general meeting, an article on fun things to do in winter. What I'd love you to do is just in chat, if you could, let's do the first one. Just drop in if you think it's aligned to all 4, or if it's not, which one you think it's not aligned to. Yeah, just please drop your comments in chat. Just the first one. Yep, Bridget says aligned to all 4. Anyone else? Yep. All right, cool. So we're seeing, yeah, that's a good point, Helen. I mean, this is where we would look at, do they actually, like, do they have an online system that they can use to pay that fine? But it's looking pretty good. All right. Yeah, Paula, that comes back to that thing about monopoly. You can't pay a parking fine anywhere else. All right, next, let's do the other one. News article with a detailed discussion of the council's general meeting. What do you think? Aligned to all 4, or one that it perhaps doesn't? Yep, cool. Yep. Yeah, so I'm getting a general vibe from chat around it's probably not aligned. And yeah, on the resourcing thing, like, it would be a fairly quick article to write, but equally, if that's half an hour it takes to write it, there would also be the time it takes to clear it and publish it and so on. And then also, if they're doing that, what does that then mean that they don't have time to do? The human need, so I'd say business need, like, there would be some requirement that it be made public, which is why I was a little bit sneaky. I framed it as a news article, rather than actually just making the minutes available online. So, the council does need to put this stuff up there. Do they need to do a news article about it? Do people need an article, or do they just need to be able to find the information? And potentially, from like a customer journey perspective, does having an article actually make it harder to find the minutes? Like, would it compete in SEO? Does it get in the way, etc.? So that's it's a bit more of a line ball, but it's a probably not. Last one, article on fun things to do in winter in this local area. What do you think? Aligned? Yes or no? Helen says yes. Bridget says no unique value. Others? Yeah. Yes, folks. Probably not resourced either. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, so that was my sense too. Like, yes, to a human need. But Catherine, not fun. Um, there would be other places people would go. Like there would be often there's local community Facebook pages, there's local media that is often covering this stuff. So, with limited resources, is it something that we should be putting our time into when folks could get elsewhere? Um, so, yeah, often with my clients, they can get a little bit excited about wanting to do something fun. And this is probably where I would agree with you, Catherine. It comes back to that people don't need your content. Often I see kind of content done by my clients where they sort of prioritize the announceables or the in inverted commas engaging stuff over actually meeting human needs, like doing the transactional stuff really well. Um, all right, cool. Thank you. So next up, how to use the NorthStar framework. So you can use it to assess what already exists. You could look at prioritizing inclusions. So if we're doing a content strategy for a client, we would absolutely have the big picture, here's the content principles and the mission, but then also include the NorthStar framework around this is how you can triage work. We find that clients usually don't appreciate just a big think piece, certainly not from us. Anyway, like some sense of how this then flows through into tactics. And then finally, triaging work in BAU. So a content team, if they're having a discussion with their senior executive who's saying, oh, we need to do this thing, then actually using this tool or other tools to structure the different lenses, like going, but do we actually, are we offering unique value? Or let's look at our calendar. Are we resourced to do this? Having a framework can help structure the conversation and make it less about pushing back and more of like a shared space to explore the issues. All right, don't forget, any model that you might look at is going to be a model in that it will leave things out. So this is a model of a house, but you can see that it doesn't capture wiring. It doesn't show where the furniture might fall. So in choosing what models you have, it's not saying that this model or any of the others I've spoken about are objectively or universally good or bad. It's more what purposes do they solve? What do we need this model to do? What must it include? And what is it okay for us to leave out? So my hope is that through this talk, I've kind of shared with you a framework that you may want to use, but also kind of a way of looking at how we structure our practice and the conversations that we have with our clients and what types of conversations you want to have where. This is sort of how might we bridge the gap between strategic direction and tactical decisions? Like that's fundamentally the challenge I wanted to address through NorthStar Framework. But that's it. I will now stop sharing, and I would love to, yeah, take any questions or indeed your reflections on how you think about that gap between the strategic and the tactical layer.
And I wondered if kind of how you prioritize when everything is important.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I would say that if you have a list of 5 things that are important, then that feels okay. If you have a list of 20 things, then that's probably where you might want to do another round and kind of go, okay, of these 2 things, which is a higher priority. Like, so in this example, and I'll share my screen again so we can talk through it.
Yeah, and I think this was yes, that one exactly.
Yeah. So in
And
this
it seemed
example,
like pretty much everything was either 5 of 5 or 4 of 5, and so
yeah. So
makes it a little challenging. Yeah.
what we didn't show is the stuff that we just rejected, or said this isn't a priority. And so, for example, this organization covers a lot of different crime types. And so, for example, aviation crime was one that wasn't one of the commissioner's top 5 priorities. It's not something that community as a whole is as concerned about. The resourcing is that in that case, we had a finite budget. So that just says like we can't actually do everything. It did have a unique value. So yeah, I would say in practice, what we usually find is that if we have, 5 to 10 areas that are our must-haves, then next down from there, you have our nice-to-haves and so on. So yeah, in practice, we find that it usually works reasonably well, and you do get a pretty clear sense of yes to this, no to that. Does that make sense? Does that answer you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, if you were in a position where it's sort of business value versus user need, for example, and they're both 5, is there ever sort of a bias toward, given that we're going to focus more on user needs versus business value, or are those too dissimilar?
I mean, my personal view, and I realize that folks on the call may have different feelings on this. My sense is that we would prioritize business value. The user need is just straight up, do people actually want this? If it is a super, super compelling user need, like there's really, really high demand, then potentially that would also bump up the business value. So let's just imagine a thought experiment where the child exploitation wasn't one of the AFP's top priorities. If the community is really, really, really concerned about child exploitation, then that would suggest that the AFP should take that seriously. So in that scenario, the AFP's business need to retain community trust means that they would take it seriously. I feel like I'm being a little bit circular in what I'm saying a bit. So maybe just to clarify, to me, the business need provides the way that we triage the user needs. And also for us as content strategists, the business need is kind of our license to operate. We care about the users, we want to meet our needs. And the way we get permission to do that is by taking the business needs seriously. I'm really curious about how other folks on the call though might make sense of that.
Does anyone have any thoughts on that? Please go ahead and share them in the chat, or we'll unmute you.
Craig, question, you gave one example where user need trumped business need, right? So the role of the NorthStar Framework is that we want to hit all 5. If something meets a user need but doesn't meet a business need, then we shouldn't do it. Would be my advice. The AFP example I just gave was possibly a slightly convoluted one, but it's essentially saying that part of the AFP's business goal is to respond to the needs of the community. So in that case, there should be a pretty strong nexus between the two. Craig, can I just check, has that answered your question? Yep. Yeah. Other questions? You too, Dan.
Actually, so Matt, one person mentioned that they were curious about the model graphic. I wonder if you could just pull up your slides again just to show that. I mean, we'll share your slides, of course, but
yeah, of course.
I guess this is Kevin. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Let's do that. And Kevin, I've literally just launched a new site. So probably if you come, give it like mid next week, if you go to my website, and I'll put that in chat, you're very welcome to, yeah, jump on there and you should find a blog post about this. But feel free to take a screenshot right now if you like. I'm just going to stop sharing because I like to see people's faces. Is there a method used to help clients prioritize business needs and user needs? I mean, it tends to be pretty contextual, Claire. Also nice to see so many Aussies here. So business needs, I'd usually look at the strategic plan for the organization. That's usually pretty good. But also, like if we've done a discovery workshop, um, we we and you'll know. Certainly, there'll be other frameworks that can specifically help you prioritize the business needs, and indeed prioritizing user needs. So yeah, I'm just trying to think if I've got anything else to say about that.
Well, you did mention doing things like, using a Miro board or, butcher paper or whatever to
Yeah,
kind of do workshops with your
yeah,
clients. And you mentioned some of the user research that you do. Maybe speak a little bit more about kind of how you structure those workshops
yeah,
and the
yeah, yeah,
user
yeah.
research that you gather.
Yeah. So how we would usually do the user research feeding into a content strategy, on a website, we look at analytics and search volume and contact center volume. Um, and so those things will usually tell us like what are people looking for, and of what's already there, what's popular, what's not. There's, of course, all of these caveats around how you interpret analytics on what's currently there, you know. But yeah, we would do that, and we would usually do some kind of qualitative research, user interviews, for example, and that, as we would know, like that's often where you get the kind of the emotional component to it. Yeah, and Claire, to your point, when we are working through this collaboratively with clients, we'd absolutely bring some of that research to the table, to do that brainstorming first. So we want to kind of the brainstorming should be prompted in some way. So that might mean, doing a playback of user research. It might mean reminding people of what the organization's priorities are, because then um, otherwise you're asking people to throw a lot of ideas out there, and then you're kind of killing their puppy by saying like, actually, so yeah, um, it's pretty simple, to be honest, the way I'd structure it. Like a bit where we brief people, share some stuff, and a bit where they then, we work through and we do that collaborative prioritization. Yeah. Does that answer your question, Claire?
No dead puppies.
Yep.
Sounds like yes.
Okay.
So Matt, I'm curious if you've ever had the experience of finding like being surprised maybe at sort of the disconnect between what maybe you expected or what you were hearing from the business or the organization you're working with and what you were hearing from the potential users in terms of, wants and
Yeah.
needs.
Yeah. I've got a really um, clear example of that. So one of the other tools we use is top task analysis. Um, and I will just quickly, actually, if someone can Google top task analysis, Jerry McGovern, and pop a link in the chat, that'd be good. But essentially what it's about is coming up with a long list of things that people might want to do when they come to your website. And then you put it in an online survey, and you send it out to people, and all they do is just rank them. They go, of this big long list, here are the 5 things that matter to me. Now, one of our clients from a little while back was Dietitians Australia. So they're the peak body, which, apologies, that's a professional association for dietitians in Australia. And they were really, really keen to have recipes on their site. And it's like, you can see the appeal, right? Like recipes for healthy eating. But I was like, there are going to be so many other places that people would look for that information. They would Google, they would follow their thanks, Paula, they would follow their favorite health influencer, you know. And so when we did the top task analysis, one of the items was find recipes. And when we played that, when we gave the survey to the business to do, and they were like, yes, recipes. And when we put it to the users, it wasn't even in the top 20 of things that they're coming to the site for. Now, they decided that they were going to have recipes anyway, because they were really, really attached to it. But that's hashtag consulting life, you know. We can just give them the advice. It was also something that I didn't think they were resourced to do, because a lot of places out there, the recipes are beautiful and there's thousands of them. So anyway, I've actually just refreshed contact with that client, so I might just go back to them and be like, so how are you traveling with those recipes, hey?
That was going to be my follow-up question, which is, do you ever sort of go back and then, I mean, I don't know, again, sort of consulting life is often you've sort of, you've completed an engagement and
Yeah,
then you go on to the next one, but it's
yeah,
often interesting and sometimes a little shocking to go back and see what the clients have done with whatever you handed off. So I'm
yeah.
curious if you have those sort of relationships where you do go back and have a
I
chance.
mean, so actually, Paula, the content audit dashboard that you're kind of to feature in a book was like our effort to do that. It's a way of like tracking how content's performing, so that you can then look at it and go, hey, dear client, we're seeing this. Like probably a lot of consultants, I need to get better at going back and checking with clients. But we did that for one of our clients, Australian Pharmacy Council, and it was one of those beautiful experiences where like this stuff actually worked. Like they're like, our bounce rate is like way, way, way below industry average. It's like half industry average. And they've like completely transformed their workflow for how they do content. They're using Gather Content, which some of you may know as an enterprise-wide tool. So it was like one of those, actually worked, you know? Yeah, do it a bit, check back in, need to get better.
Any
So
other questions?
top,
Sorry.
top task analysis, yeah, like you can do it just with an online survey. I'd encourage you to read the book, because there's a few little nuances to it, but it's also conceptually quite simple. The top task analysis will often scare clients a bit, because they're like, what do you mean we're going to give people one survey where there's just like this massive long list? And we often need to kind of talk them around a little bit. Yeah.
And if you ever have a chance to see Jerry speak, he's actually quite entertaining. So
Yeah. Um,
yeah.
other questions?
Anyone? All right. Well,
Could I get a screenshot as well of people who are willing to put their cameras on or whatever? If not, it would just be like Paula, Ariel, and I, which is fine. But if you don't feel comfortable, just leave them off. That's totally cool. I'll put my I'll just put my details in. I'll put my details in chat. So if folks want to connect with me on LinkedIn, very welcome to do so. Okay. How does someone in Australia latch onto names like True North and NorthStar? So I'm really happy to answer that question. It's a little bit niche, but so maybe if there's any other questions, I'll take those and then I'll dive into like how I arrived at the name. Oh, host is disabled video. Okay, cool. No worries. Oh, well, I've just got a screenshot of us three, so it's fine.
Cool.
So all right, so let's do the how I arrived at that name. Any other questions before we go to that one? No. Or everyone's like, just tell us, Matt. Just get to the point. All right, cool. So I had the name True North. I was initially True North Writing, then rebranded to True North Content for because I wanted to kind of elevate it a bit. I did some comparator or competitor analysis and identified certain trends in my space, and a lot of it was that there were a lot of like cute names, like Wordsworth or whatever. And I wanted a name that kind of related to something that was out there in the world and also had a sense of clarity and direction to it. And I looked at it, there was also like Keystone content, but people thought that sounded too much like Keystone Cops with the wrong association. So, it's just a process of like like having a really clear sense of what I wanted to achieve, or kind of the space I wanted the name to exist in. And then I was literally just like on a bus, happily drunk, and it just kind of popped into my brain, and I was like, yeah, that's something. So True North came first, then the NorthStar Framework. It was actually when I was like, I had the framework and I couldn't think what to call it. And it was an American speaker at a conference I was at. He was like, oh, you call it the NorthStar Framework. So I was like, okay, yes. I do realize that there's a certain Canadian element to it as well. Apparently it's a national anthem or something. Yes.
Anything else? Sorry, my apologies about the video. I've actually been like clicking through all of the Zoom controls here. I'm not sure. It was not my intent to not allow anyone to be on video, but uh seems like I might have set that as some sort of a setting when we're setting up for security. So my apologies.
Yeah, no problem.
We had a we had to tighten down security because we had a really interesting meetup where we had some attendees come in and start bombing the chat. It was really weird.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, so we just gotten really clear on security for our meetups.
Yeah. Anyway, so apologies for that if you wanted to be on video, but looks like we're kind of wrapping up here anyway. So before everyone disappears, I want to say thank you again, Matt. This has been super interesting. Delighted to actually have a little more time with you, other than our exchanges on LinkedIn and email. We will be sharing the video and the slides sometime in the next week or so. So keep an eye on all of our channels for those. And again, please do join us again for one of our other events.
Thank you
Thanks.
so much, Matt.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Good afternoon, good evening, good night to wherever you are.
Good evening, good morning.